This video is sponsored by Only Crits. As I discussed in a video at the end of last year, I am getting ready to run an in-person D&D campaign for basically the first time since 2020. And even when I was playing in person before that, my games had drifted to be fairly heavy on Theater of the Mind and not a lot of maps and minis and accessories, though that was not always the case, and we'll talk about that a lot more another time. But whenever I play D&D, no matter what the format, online, in person, whatever, I always love to give the players handouts. Even when I play online, I still love to upload documents to the Discord that the players can read. Things that would look like artifacts from the world of the game. Maps, secret messages, passages of lore found in old tomes. I love all that stuff. It's just been something that has always been a ton of fun for me. And physical handouts used to be a huge part of how I ran in-person games. But I haven't made a physical handout in 4 years. And in that time, I've learned about some new techniques from other creators right here on YouTube. So I thought I would give some of those techniques a try. I'm going to try a bunch of different methods to produce cool handouts for my Phandelver game and take you along for the ride as I try to find the best approach to make cool documents to give my players to make them feel more immersed in the world. This video is going to have some very minor spoilers for Lost Mine of Phandelver, which makes up the first few chapters of Phandelver and below, so if you intend to play in that campaign anytime, you should probably click off to another video. Check out this one. I don't know what it is, but I know it's a good one. Otherwise, even if you don't plan to run a Phandelver campaign, come and watch me create some handouts. It should be a lot of fun. Before we begin, I want to remind you that I'm doing a YouTube live stream tomorrow, Friday, February 9th, at 5 p.m. Pacific time. This is my belated live stream to celebrate reaching 40,000 subscribers, which is a milestone we hit at the end of 2023. Maybe early 2024, I don't know. Time is a weird soup. We'll hang out, I'll answer questions on any topics you want to talk about. It's going to be a great time. So make sure to join me for that right here on YouTube. Now, the first step to making handouts is to create the actual content that will appear on the piece of paper. In this case, I've got a list of the handouts that appear in the Lost Mine of Phandelver adventure. We've got a letter sent from one villain to another written by the Black Spider. We've got a flyer offering a reward for hunting orcs. We've got a danger sign warning about plant monsters and zombies. There's a journal entry found in a dungeon, and there's Gundren Rockseeker's map of Wave Echo Cave. Now, when I made a video in December talking about how I'm going to run Lost Mine of Phandelver, a bunch of folks in the comments said that I should really just run the adventure out of the new adventure book, Phandelver and Below, The Shattered Obelisk. The first few chapters of that book are just Lost Mine of Phandelver again, but the commenter said that a few things were changed that might be interesting. Some NPCs got some minor tweaks, some typos were fixed, some art was added, that sort of thing. So I went to a local game store and I found a copy of the adventure. Now, as I discussed at the beginning of the year, when I buy a Wizard of the Coast book, I would also like to spend the same amount of money on another product from another publisher to help share the love and to pick up other books that I'm excited to check out. So I also got a copy of the Marvel Multiverse RPG Handbook. I would have preferred to support an indie publisher rather than, you know, a huge company like Marvel, but I just had to go to a bunch of stores just to get a copy of Phandelver and Below. The store I did find it at just did not have a huge selection of non-Wizard of the Coast products. Besides, I'm a slut for Marvel, so I'm excited to check out this book. You'll see me talk about it in a future video, I am sure. Anyway, Phandelver and Below actually comes with a poster of the Sword Coast. I don't know how much I'd actually use this at the table since it does have some adventure locations marked on it, and the players are not meant to know where those are. But once they discover those locations, like Wave Echo Cave, then this map could actually be really useful. Also, on skimming the early chapters of Phandelver and Below, it looks like the orc reward flyer is absent. That's definitely a change that I can understand, although, speaking personally, I do think that I have enough prowess as a game master that I can include something like that and still involve enough nuance so the players understand that orcs are unique individuals, rather than learning the wrong lesson that all orcs are evil and need to be genocided. I don't know, maybe that's arrogant of me, maybe I should cut the rewards flyer as well, but I guess we'll find out. So I had a choice. I could either create all these handouts myself, or I could look online and see if one of the most popular 5e products of all time has some printable handouts already made. And sure enough, Sasha's Cauldron on the DM's Guild has uploaded a whole packet of printable Phandelver handouts. So I bought that one and checked out everything she'd created. All these handouts are super cool. There are menus for the provisioners in town, Barthun's Provisions, and the Lion's Shields. There are maps of Phandalin, Thundertree, and the Sword Coast. There's the Orc Reward poster, menus for the Stonehill Inn and the Sleeping Giant Tap House, a danger sign for plant monsters and zombies, and a journal excerpt that can be found in one of the dungeons. I'm actually not wild about that journal entry handout, but all the others I think are amazing. But I actually do want to talk about the journal entry. I think there's a lesson here. Now, this is completely subjective. This is just my style. But I think that talking about this will help give you some insight into how I think about handouts. I see what Sasha's Cauldron was going for with this one. Unlike most of the other handouts, it actually seems like this one was really handwritten into an actual journal and scanned to make it look like an open journal page. But there's something I've learned over the years when I've created handouts, which is when you write something yourself, it's really, really easy to make it illegible. True story. The first time one of my characters died, I had a letter written in the case of my death, and I'd written it with a calligraphy pen. Not like a feather quill, you can just buy calligraphy pens at Michael's. But when something is handwritten, well, let's just say the impact of having my death letter read by the other players over my corpse was undercut a bit by the words that were just plain hard to read. And so yeah, this journal entry is borderline illegible. Now, if I was the player who got this handout, I would scour it looking for as many clues as I could find. But you know, I'm a handout guy. I don't know if my new players will have that level of interest in pulling clues out of something this hard to read. Handouts can be a careful balancing act between a fun form of immersion and giving players extra work they didn't actually sign up for. And based on my personal experience, I don't think this handout is ideal, so I'm probably going to end up recreating my own version before we get to that point in the campaign. But that being said, Sasha's Cauldron did do the work of creating the text that will appear in the journal, and that's going to be extremely useful when I make my own version of the handout and I'm trying to figure out how to present the information. I can just use what she wrote. And all these other handouts are absolutely fantastic. All the others look so much better than anything I was ever going to make on my own. So even though I'm probably not going to use their version of the journal entry, I'm still going to use that text from my own document, and I'm going to use all these other handouts, so I'm absolutely getting my money's worth. This was a great purchase. Also, this is a little strange. There's no letter from the Black Spider. That handout isn't included, and there's no Wave Echo Cave map either. Those are the two stated handouts from the adventure. I wonder if Sasha's Cauldron just felt like there were a bunch of other resources on the internet for those two handouts. I personally looked online, but I couldn't find a version of the Black Spider letter that I liked, so I just mocked up my own in Microsoft Word. It actually took me a while to find a font that I liked. Again, it has to look like handwriting, but it also has to be legible. You know everything I said about how handwritten notes can be hard to read? Well, that's also true for fonts that are meant to evoke handwriting, especially fancy calligraphy handwriting, or even just some cursive fonts. I think I found one that will be easy enough to read while still looking like handwriting. I guess we'll find out if I got it right once I put it in front of my players. I also looked online for a Wave Echo Cave map that I liked, but honestly, making that handout is going to have to be a whole other video. The best Wave Echo Cave map that I've seen was in some tweets that I screenshotted ages ago, and I'll probably use those as reference to make my own Wave Echo Cave map for the players. But honestly, I think that's going to be a whole different project. There are some things that I want to do with that are going to be much more elaborate than what I'm trying to do today. So for now, we're going to work with this pack of handouts from Sasha's Cauldron and my custom Black Spider letter. Now, the first option for making handouts is just to print these onto plain printer paper in black and white. And you know what? If you give these to your players like this, they'll still think it's cool. They might not feel immersed in the same way they would if it was on aged paper, but they'll still have something they can hold in their hands and wave around and hand to each other and put in their binders and go back to and read whenever they want and mark up with their own notes. Like, this is perfectly fine. That being said, these handouts I bought also came with a color version. I'd probably use these for a digital game, but you could just print this on plain white paper in color. And of course, you're gonna get something that looks more like aged paper at first, and that's really cool. But there's a few downsides here. First, you've got the white border around the edge, there's no getting around that. And second, you can tell when the printer is running out of ink, as my printer clearly is. See these lines that run through the center of the paper? I'm probably running low on red or yellow toner. And the more of these kinds of handouts you print, especially in color, the faster you go through color toner. And that can get expensive. If you want to print color handouts on plain white paper, I would honestly recommend just sending them to someplace like Staples. You'll still have to pay some money, but that might be worth it for you. However, personally, this doesn't quite feel like it's worth the cost to me. You could just print it in black and white and make the paper do the work instead of the printer. And that's what we're going to do for our next two examples. The third option is the one that I used to use all the time. This was how I made handouts. You print the handouts onto parchment paper. You can find this stuff at Staples, and it comes in multiple shades, and this was my approach for all of my handouts from 2012 till 2020, during the entire run that I had as a handout-heavy DM in person. I would do this for handwritten handouts or for stuff I printed out. Also, here's a little trick I used to do all the time. If you have a handwritten handout, just write it onto white paper and photocopy it onto the parchment paper. That way, if you make a mistake, you didn't waste any parchment paper, you can start again with another blank piece of white paper, and you can keep the original and keep making copies if you want to use the same handout for another group. Just a little life hack for you. These are the three shades of parchment paper I've got. One of them is ivory, and this is just resume paper. Then I've got copper and gold. I would mostly use copper in my game since it looks the most like aged paper, but it is nice having multiple options of different shades. That way you can have multiple handouts next to each other and they feel like they came from a different source. Of course, there are some issues with this approach. The first is, sure, I can have different shades, but really just three. And even then, the gold doesn't really look like aged paper. It works fine when it's alongside the others, but on its own, it seems like exactly what it is. I also find that I don't go through this stuff that quickly. Like, obviously I haven't made physical handouts in 4 years, I haven't even been using it that much, but even before that, I bought 1 pack of gold paper in 2012 and I'm still using it. I think I bought 1 more pack of copper paper since 2012, I think I'm on my 2nd pack, but, you know, I'm only on my 2nd pack. And the resume paper we've obviously used for resumes, but even so, I think this is still the first packet I bought 12 years ago. And they take up drawer space and they're not cheap, each one of these is like $20. Is that worth it for you? It was for me. Using a copper page can make a simple handout immediately feel more tangible, more like an artifact of the game world. But since then, I've learned about some other methods to age paper. So once I go through these packets, I'm probably not going to buy any more of these. But this is the fastest way to take a simple handout and make it feel more authentic. And sometimes this is really all you need. After all, for something like the menu of items available at Barthon's Provisions, the paper wouldn't exactly be exposed to the elements all that often. Having a clean page that you can just hand to your players still works really well at capturing the vibe you're going for. Another cool way to capture a vibe at the table is just to use the right dice set, which is easier than ever thanks to today's sponsor, Only Crits. Perfect segue. Only Crits is a fantastic resource for dice that capture all sorts of different moods. For example, if you want to channel some of the strange body horror from the latter half of Phandelver and below, check out the Corrupted Meadow set. Want something that has the same aesthetic as the Phandelver variant cover? Try the Sage's Emerald set or the Mossy Shimmer set. Want to get ready for the Vecna adventure that's coming out later this year? Check out the Liquid Core Eyeball dice set or the Spectral Skull D20. And if you want to save some money when you buy all these dice, you can visit onlycrits.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK to save 12% off your order. And if you use that code, that helps support my channel in a very tangible way. So once again, please visit onlycrits.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK at checkout when you buy your dice from Only Crits. And thank you so much to Only Crits for sponsoring this video. Now, I had my approach to making handouts. Just print them on this cool paper. And that worked great for me. But in just the past few months, I've learned about other methods of aging the actual paper. Now, I always heard you could do that with coffee, but apparently you can also do it with tea. Fellow YouTuber The Gaming Tome made a great video showing how he used coffee and tea in different ways to get different kinds of aged paper. And Bob Worldbuilder made a video about his own approach to get the same result. He said that tea and coffee didn't really work for him, but instead he used soy sauce and it came out great. And so I wanted to try both their processes myself. Now, both of their videos are in the description below because this is not exactly a tutorial. Because as you'll see, I was really experimenting with all these approaches myself. Sometimes I got really excellent results, other times it didn't quite work out how I wanted. But at the end of the day, I got some really cool handouts that I cannot wait to show you. I started by printing copies of all these handouts on plain white paper. I had no idea if I should print it first and then age it, or age it first and then try to print on it, but I get so frustrated when I run into printer issues, so I didn't want to risk aging paper and then trying to run that through the printer. So I opted just to print these items off and then age them. I printed the Barthon's Provisions page double-sided again, just like before. I started boiling water for the coffee and tea, and in the meantime, I took the spider's letter that I printed on copper parchment paper and just soaked it in water, just to make it feel a little bit more weathered and distressed. It wouldn't get any distortion or stains, but it would change the feel of the paper and make it less crisp. Once the water was boiled, I poured it into 2 cups. I put 3 tea bags into one because I wanted the tea to be as dark as possible. I just poured a bunch of coffee grounds in the other. I don't drink coffee, but it doesn't really need to be drinkable. It just needs to be brown and gritty. While the tea steeped and the coffee coalesced, I took that time to tear the edges of the paper for some of the handouts. Some documents, like the ones hanging on tavern walls, don't really need to be too badly distressed or weathered. In fact, the more pristine they are, the more that says about the venue. Others, like the sign warning people about the dangerous plant monsters and undead, would be extremely ragged. The ragged edges would also be fun for the maps that I would give to the players of Phandalin and Thundertree and the Sword Coast. Those are not necessarily diegetic handouts. The characters might not have these maps. And in plenty of other campaigns, if the characters don't have a map, then the players don't get a map. But these are going to be new players who mainly come from the tradition of playing video games, so I get the feeling that giving them a map will help them orient themselves and understand their options, which will empower them to make their own choices in the game. Now, I had some trouble with ripping the edges off of the Sword Coast map. As Bob Worldbuilder points out in his video, you have to be careful when tearing paper because short edges tend to tear much more raggedly than long edges do. The first time I tried, I tore the bottom off of the map, so the Mirror of Dead Men no longer said Dead Men. Now, they're not going to go to the Mirror of Dead Men in this adventure, but that's not the point. A map handout is designed to inspire the players' imaginations to run wild, and a name as evocative as Mirror of Dead Men does a great job with that. So I reprinted the map, but this time I scaled it down a bit so I could more easily tear off the edges without losing that detail. This time, Mirror of Dead Men was still visible, but on the long edge, I tore too close to the map and I had to carefully tear around Old Owl Well, and that just looked completely artificial. So I reprinted it again. Third time I got pretty close on the crags at the top and tore off some of the drawings of the hills, but I didn't lose any of the text, so that was fine. Third time's the charm. Now the tea and coffee were ready, so I poured the tea into a glass casserole dish. I soaked the provisions menus first, and then I put them in the oven at 300 degrees. No other steps for those pages, since they would be the least distressed, they're getting the least work. Then I spread soy sauce onto the Sleeping Giant menu and the Black Spider's letter. This is the solution that Bob World Builder uses to brown his papers.
Hey Mike, very cool to see you trying out my technique in your video. Just remember, we're trying to make a rustic looking map here, so it doesn't have to look perfect. You know, the soy sauce might not spread out super evenly. There might be some spots, or, you know, and you want those wrinkled edges, those torn edges. That's all part of the effect. It'll look great.
Thanks, Bob. I'm excited to see how the soy sauce comes out. Then I got the maps and the danger sign and the Stonehill Inn and reward flyer and soaked all those in tea. For the final two, Stonehill and Reward, I also poured tea onto the baking sheet, something that I picked up from the Gaming Tome video. And here's some foreshadowing. This was too much tea. To keep things distinct, we'll refer to these two pages as the tea bath pages, since they were completely submerged underwater, well, under tea, when they went into the oven. Now I can't put all these in the oven at the same time, so the maps go on top of the stove. They were actually resting on top of the glass casserole dish full of hot tea. That'll be important later. I gave each sheet about 5 to 10 minutes, and I think they only took that long because I had multiple sheets in at a time. But for the tea bath pages, well, they were taking a lot longer. Like, a lot longer. While I would pull one paper out and put in another, the tea bath pages would stay in. And they just needed a lot more time. Another interesting thing happened. The soy sauce pages came out looking a bit darker than Bob World Builders had, but they looked really cool. However, there were a couple of white spots, sections that I hadn't managed to cover when I brushed the soy sauce across the paper.
Oh yeah, okay, so you ended up with a couple of those white spots or whatever, but hey, that all really adds character to the piece, right? Players love that kind of stuff. It just feels more like an in-game artifact. That looks awesome. You definitely don't need to think about spreading on more soy sauce or anything to try to fix it, right? No, it looks great at it. Wait, Mike, no, don't. No.
So I splashed more soy sauce onto the paper to even out those parts of the handout. I cooked them for about 6 minutes until they were pretty much dry. Sort of. Oh, and of course, the tea bath pages were still in there.
I had things I wanted to do today!
Now it's time to cook the maps and the journal handout. Like I said, I'm not planning on using this version of the journal handout, but it's still going to be useful to see how it responds to different mixtures. These handouts had already been dipped in tea, but now I poured coffee onto them and wiped it off. This is something from the Gaming Tome video that gave some handouts a very different texture. What I did not realize at the time was that he sponged the coffee off, whereas I wiped it off. So I didn't get the same effect, but pouring on the coffee and then wiping it away definitely did change the results from those that hadn't had any coffee at all. Another funny thing was that some of the maps were already browning in the corners, because the cooking sheets had been resting on top of the hot basin of tea. So the tea had started cooking the paper right through the baking sheet before they'd even gone into the oven. And that's something else that you could do a lot more with if you wanted to. You could use a lighter to burn the edges of your papers. That wasn't right for what I wanted to do with any of these handouts, but I might try something like that for the map once we get to that video. Anyway, once again, these maps took a lot less time than the tea baths. Each one took about 6 minutes. I also assumed that opening the oven to remove and add more documents probably was not helping the tea baths cook much faster. Eventually, Stonehill Inn finished, but it took even longer to get the orc reward sheet done. In fact, all told, the Stonehill Inn took 50 minutes, the orc reward took an hour and a half. Again, that was just way too much tea. It was maybe a 1/4 inch of tea on top of the sheet. That was just, yeah, don't use that much tea. At this point, I reviewed the soy sauce pages, and they were dry, but they were still really sticky. There was just way too much soy sauce in the paper. I took the Sleeping Giant page and tried dipping it into the tea to soak some soy sauce out of it, and then I was going to dry it in the oven. But the paper completely ripped apart as I handled it. So I reprinted the Sleeping Giant and dipped it in the tea, which now also had a little bit of soy sauce in it. Sort of an happy accident there. Then I dabbed the tea bags on top of it over and over, making sure to splash the water from the tea bags onto the paper. But this time, I didn't coat the entire cooking sheet in a 1/4 inch of tea, because that was too much tea. Those went in for about 20 minutes, and then half the paper was done. It was lifted up from the cooking sheet, but the other half was still wet. I lifted the paper and put it back down, and in hindsight, this turned out to be a very useful step, because it managed to get a bunch of the loose tea off the front of the paper and onto the back, which helped cook it a lot more evenly front and back. I pulled it out 5 minutes later, and then I was done. So let's review our findings. First of all, for any paper that had colored ink and not just black ink, the color ink bled. How much it bled seemed to depend on the process I used, but it was always noticeable. Sometimes that was fine. After all, the danger sign is exposed to the elements, so the fact that some of the color bled doesn't really matter at all. For others, like the sleeping giant, some bleeding colors might not suit the circumstances quite as well, although we'll talk about that handout a little bit more later. The spider's letter printed on parchment paper and soaked in water came out pretty good. It doesn't have any extra distressed paper visuals, but it feels just enough like a wet letter that had dried that it feels interesting and doesn't feel crisp like I just printed it off. The ones that were tea soaked and nothing else, they were okay. They had a really cool texture, but color-wise, I don't think they were that much better than if I just used resume paper. Also, the double-sided menu had completely bled through. This handout is absolutely unusable. That's good to know. This method does not work well for double-sided documents, unless maybe you print them onto the already aged paper. The soy sauce pages were kind of a failure. I used way too much by going back for a second pass. Now visually, the black spider's letter looked really interesting. Thanks to the 2 layers, it looked like it was warped by goo or ooze. But whether or not that makes sense for the black spider's letter, it certainly was not what I was going for. And it was also sticky, and it made the room reek of soy sauce. I'll have to try that process again, but this time it was a failure. The tea baths, despite taking an eternity, looked terrific. The orc letter did get a bit crispier on the sides because the cooking sheet was too narrow, but the Stonehill Inn page looks incredible. That being said, the back has not cooked as thoroughly. I might want to cook the back a second time if I wanted to even it out. The maps with a little coffee on them felt really great, but they didn't really come out all that distressed. In fact, the most burned section was the part that was burned before it went into the oven at all because it was resting on top of the tea. But they feel really good, they're readable, and the front and the back look pretty even. The Sword Coast map was darker, but it looks really, really great. Honestly, it's one of my favorites. Except for one little detail. Can you spot it? It's the brand of the cooking sheet. When I use this sheet to bake paper in the future, I will need to make sure that nothing overlaps with that brand. The journal pages I downloaded looked pretty good, but they were also even less readable now. At this point, I really would not be able to give this handout to my players, but again, this was not a handout that I planned to use at all. It was just a test. The Sleeping Giant handout looks amazing. I think it's too distressed for what that handout would be. If this had been a map, or the letter, or the journal page, I would be over the moon. But even so, this felt really good to see. It meant that when I was just kind of messing around with combining the processes, putting some soy sauce in the tea, dabbing the tea bags on top and splashing it with a little bit more tea, and shifting the paper during the baking process, I wound up with my favorite distressing that I got out of the entire procedure. I actually got the feeling that I could replicate this and find some success. So, emboldened, I tried again. I reprinted the Sword Coast map, the Black Spider letter, the Sleeping Giant, the Orc Reward, and just for fun, the Provisioner flyers. Because I realized that 2 of my players work in HR, so if I hand them a handout on resume paper, they might actually be completely pulled out of the game. I brewed some tea and ripped the edges of the map again, and this time I nailed it on the first try. I had a few copies of the spider letter, so I coated one in soy sauce and dipped the other in tea and covered it in coffee, then I dabbed some of the coffee off. Into the oven at 350 degrees this time, and wow, it took just a couple of minutes to fill the house with the smell of something burning. This was the soy sauce paper. It was literally cooking on the cookie sheet. Here was the final version. It was stiff and crispy and had some weird circles across it from how the soy sauce cooked onto the paper.
All right, Mike, I'm not even really sure how it's gotten to this stage so far with the soy sauce method. So here we go. For my original style that I showed in that video, I'm gonna crumple this up first. Cool, we get that little worn effect. Gonna tear off those edges too. And then we're gonna splash on a couple drops of soy sauce. Use a brush to spread it out, but like I said in my original, pretty evenly. We don't have to worry about it being 100% even. We want some character in here. We put it in the oven at like 350 for like 3 minutes, maybe 5. I don't know. You just check on it. You take it out. Golden, literally.
Yeah, wow, that looks great. Real quick, could you mail that to Los Angeles? Never mind. No, it's fine. But remember, I had 2 black spider letters in the oven, and the coffee-stained letter came out great. The back was a little bit plain, so I poured tea and coffee onto the back of the page and put it back into the oven. This helped a lot, but now the front was less dark than the back, which was fine. I totally could have used that version. But again, I was experimenting. I poured some coffee onto the front, and this time I didn't wipe it off or sponge it off. I just lay a paper towel across the whole paper to soak up a lot of the coffee. I do wish I'd covered the entire paper with coffee this time, but as it was, it really only covered some splashes of the paper. The end result still worked, it just would have been even better if the coffee had been better spread around. I dipped the sleeping giant, the orc reward, and the map in tea, splashed them with the tea bags, and poured a little coffee on them and soaked some of it up. I had to pull them out of the oven every couple minutes to unstick them from the pan, because the corners of the pages were starting to bake onto the sheet. The orc reward finished first, but it wasn't that different in color, so I poured some tea onto it and put it back in. After a few minutes, they came out and looked pretty good. The Barthon's provisions pages, which were separate this time and not double-sided, got soaked in tea and some tea poured on top. Again, I had to keep picking those up so they wouldn't cook. I think it has to do with the nature of that cookie sheet. I don't think I should use this one for handouts going forward. Eventually, I made sure to lie them down so there was just a little bit of an air bubble at the edge of the paper so the heat could get underneath the paper and cook the back. So that way, hopefully the paper would not cook onto the sheet. For the Lion Shields handout, I poured a little coffee into the tea while the paper was already soaking, splashed some of the tea and coffee mixture on top, and put the paper into the oven.
So you're just kind of doing stuff, huh? Yeah, I'm just kind of doing stuff, I don't know.
Eventually, everything did come out of the oven and I could review my handiwork. Some of the provisions pages were still a bit damp, but they could just air dry. I just didn't want them to totally cook onto the pan again. Again, these are the nicer, well-equipped shops, so I didn't want these papers to be overly distressed. I didn't want them to burn the edges. And so once again, I'm looking it all over and I'm really happy with the results. Sure, the letter has some obvious water staining on it, but like, that's fine. It's not the end of the world, and it's good to know that I can get that effect if I want to. I can create specific localized stains by pouring coffee on and soaking it up. Maybe in the future I can apply it to more like a corner or the edge of the paper, but this still looks really cool, and I can give this to my players. The map came out great, the sleeping giant looks terrific, the reward looks fantastic. The provisions pages have a bit of bleeding still, but you know what? They still look great, they're totally usable. And I really like the slight burnt edges on the lion shields, they just add a little bit of character to the page. Again, these are all handouts I would feel really happy with giving to my players. And if I kept going, I could keep experimenting and get darker pages with even more interesting textures. And it's good knowing that I have that option. Honestly, most of these pages are meant to be in taverns and inns, so since they would mostly be indoors, I don't need to go much further for these. They wouldn't be sun damaged or weather damaged. But for others, like when I make my own version of the journal at some point, and I'll distress that page, I can experiment with these techniques to make them darker and more distressed because they're finding it in like a dungeon. All in all, this second attempt took me 45 minutes, but none of the pages individually took very much time, except for the provisions at the end. Those took maybe the longest, maybe 15 minutes per page. That was a while, and if I hadn't kept moving them, I think they just would have baked onto the pan more. A really interesting thing happened the first night I was working on these handouts. As I looked across the table at printed handouts that had been stacked into separate piles, and at aged paper that had been set out to dry, I got hit with this huge wave of nostalgia. Back when I used to make physical handouts for my in-person games, there would be times where a whole desk or table would be covered with stacks of the papers or cards I was working on. And so seeing these papers just brought me back to those home games. I've been wanting to play more in-person games for a couple of years now, but I haven't had a local group until the one I'm currently putting together for this game. But going through this process made me realize just how much I miss in-person gaming. This Phandelver game probably is not going to happen until after my child is born, just because my wife is going to be one of the players, and right now, asking her to commit to sitting in one spot and playing a D&D game for any amount of time is a lot to ask. But once the baby's here and once we've reached something close to a level of comfort with our new status quo, I am really excited to show these handouts to my friends as we all sit down to play. And of course, my wife is going to say, "Are these the handouts where you almost burned down the house making them?" That's the problem with having your partner in your D&D group. When you almost start a fire prepping for your game, your partner is probably going to remember that and bring it up when you finally get a chance to play. Of course, one possible solution for that would be maybe, I don't know, don't start fires when you're prepping your game, but come on, let's not set unrealistic goals for ourselves. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you so much to Bob for jumping in on this video. This was a unplanned collaboration. I was not expecting to bring him in on this one, but once I was having so much trouble with the soy sauce method, I just had to loop him in to record some reactions. I'm also really glad he got a chance to show you that his method is not the problem. These issues seem to be due to user error. So once again, Bob, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This is the first of my videos where I prep for an in-person game of D&D, and you're gonna get some more of these throughout the year, so if you want to follow that journey, make sure to subscribe. I'm also really hoping to hit 50,000 subscribers this year. Ideally, I would love to hit that goal this summer, so again, subscribe. And also, join me for tomorrow's YouTube live stream. I mentioned that earlier. It's going to be a ton of fun. Support me on Patreon or YouTube memberships to get cool rewards like D&D content, exclusive live streams, early videos, and voting on upcoming video topics. Join my Discord server to hang out with other cool people. We have an awesome discussion thread whenever a new video comes out. It's really nice if you're looking for more perspectives than just mine, which I strongly encourage. As you saw from this video, You should not trust me to be a perfect source for all of your information. Sometimes I make mistakes. And make sure to sign up for my newsletter. That is with the other links in the doobly-doo below. If you want to know more about my home games, check out this video about why I don't ban multiclassing. Until next time, play fair and have fun.